So I mentioned something in Newswave when Phil Spencer had mentioned the tribalism or the console wars, and that was that you can't really have these questions about the situation between the two systems or any actual criticism at times because it will get caught up in the console wars. So a lot of times there's no real rational discussion. It's just a lot of like confusion and arguing and anger back and forth. It's very strange considering it's just two inanimate objects, as Phil Spencer says. But let's go over here because there was something that has been, I've seen this over the past week or so following Digital Foundry, and it is a little surprising based on what we were expecting to happen when third-party games started to be compared between the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. And we do have a little bit of an insight here from The Verge, and it kind of lines up with what I was hearing before when it came to development kits for the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure the like button down below helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the SpawnWave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. Now, this article is linked below, and it's called "Why is the PS5 Outperforming the World's Most Powerful Console?" Remember, Microsoft has continued to say this. The Series X is the most powerful console. So we expect that our 12 teraflop monster would outperform the 10.28 teraflop PlayStation 5 across the board. That's at least what we expect. But early testing is not showing that. And if you look through The Verge's article, the beginning is kind of setting up where they're going with this, which is kind of explain why this is all happening. But games like Assassin's Creed, Devil May Cry, Dirt 5, Call of Duty does show the PS5 taking the lead in some cases. Now, not consistently all the time. There are some times where we see things like ray tracing mode in Call of Duty actually perform better on the Series X, holding 60 frames per second, whereas the PS5 might drop down into the 40s as an example. But when we move over to things like 120 frames per second in Dirt 5, the game looks and performs better on the PlayStation 5. And it's kind of the same way on Devil May Cry 5, where the high frame rate mode just runs better on the PS5. What's weird is Microsoft has a marketing deal with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, so you have like the Xbox logo next to it all the time. They talk about how it plays best on the Xbox, things like that, just to try to market and push the Xbox alongside of what is actually a really good Assassin's Creed game. The problem is Assassin's Creed Valhalla runs better on the PlayStation 5. Now, there is one issue I have with Assassin's Creed Valhalla that is kind of frustrating. The only way they seem to have solved it is to tell you to have a display that has variable refresh rate enabled, and a lot of people don't have that display, so they just live with screen tearing, and that's for the PS5 as well as the Xbox Series X. Right now, the Series X appears to be the only system with variable refresh rate, whereas the PS5 does not. Sony has acknowledged this and says that's going to come in like a future update, but like there's a lot of things they had to add to that PS5 before we get to like variable refresh rate. We'll see with all of that. Anyway, further down the article, after going through like the backstory of all the testing and all of this, they say Microsoft only allowed developers to submit games for Xbox Series X certification in June after delivering an update to its Game Developers Kit GDK that followed the company's rather tight schedule for dev kit allocations, all while I've been consistently hearing that many developers had access to PS5 dev kits far in advance of Xbox versions. This came up during the Spawncast this past weekend, and that's when like Nate and MVG, they had some comments that were thrown at them saying don't damage control for Xbox. That actually is what was going on, and even I had heard that. The Xbox dev kits went out later, seemingly because Microsoft was waiting for some technology from AMD to become available for their chip. That is seemingly the word going around now, whereas PlayStation 5 dev kits, which, remember, we saw pictures of those things a while ago. It looked super strange. Didn't it look like this little, this space hanger almost, the V, sort of like for the Roman numeral 5. That was the PS5 dev kit that had been out there months before the Xbox Series X dev kits were ready. In fact, the word is that the Series X dev kits were technically Xbox Scorpio dev kits early on. They just said use those for now until we can get you the Series X dev kits with the newer technology. And I think that's kind of what we see the Dirt 5 developers mention here, saying we started doing the groundwork for the Xbox Series X development long before we even received the hardware. This kind of thinking from Xbox allowed us to get a real head start on next-gen development, so after receiving our early Xbox Series X hardware, we were up and running really quickly. The only issue there is Dirt 5 does not perform as well on the Series X as it does on the PlayStation 5, and that is weird to hear them say this when we see the results are not lining up with how they are describing it here, unless they really were developing on like an Xbox Scorpio development kit and they're trying to get it moved over to the Series X in time for launch. I can tell you now, after doing previews and work with the Series X ahead of launch, yeah, a lot of patches were coming in hot. There were patches consistently during that preview time that we were being alerted to. So yeah, a lot of different things were happening in the background just to have this system ready for preview and then eventually launch. Now, The Verge also brings up something very interesting here that started to make sense after I went through this. Remember how I mentioned early on that we didn't see any Xbox Series X gameplay? And I thought that was weird. Like, we weren't seeing anything being played on the Series X. We were seeing stuff being played on the PS5, and that makes sense considering PlayStation 5 dev kits went out earlier than the Series X dev kits. How do you have a game ready to demo if you don't have a Series X dev kit? So I can see why some of these developers would have defaulted to the PlayStation 5 version, or Sony just being ready with their side with the chip that I guess is missing out on some of the technology that Microsoft waited for. But on the other side, it shows that Sony, at least with developer tools, were more prepared for this launch. We can even see here Phil Spencer mentioning this during an interview with The Verge, saying we were a little bit later than the competition because we were waiting for some specific AMD technology in our chip. And now people are wondering, okay, well, what is this specific technology that you were waiting for when we see games early out of the gate really are not performing as well as we would have figured them to? It makes you wonder how this generation's going to play out. Is this just an early indication of the Xbox not being completely ready, or does it show that the PlayStation 5 and what Mark Cerny did with that system really does have it punching above its weight? Now, Microsoft did provide a statement to The Verge after I'm sure they asked, hey, why aren't these systems doing as well as everyone thought they would? After you guys said it was the most powerful system, this is what they said. We are aware of performance issues in a handful of optimized titles on Xbox Series X and S and are actively working with our partners to identify and resolve the issues to ensure an optimal experience. As we begin a new console generation, our partners are just now scratching the surface of what next-gen consoles can do, and minor bug fixes are expected as they learn how to take full advantage of our new platform. We are eager to continue working with developers to further explore the capability of Xbox Series X and S in the future. Now, I will say it's not uncommon for a system to technically underperform when it first comes out. We see this every time with console generations where they improve heavily over the span of 6 to 7 years of that generation as developers get more used to the hardware and the software, and then the tools even get updated over time by Microsoft or Sony or even Nintendo, and they get more feedback from the developers as to what they would like to improve on. But it's not great for a system that is relying heavily on its third parties right now at launch, with Halo Infinite being pushed. I mean, right now they're just like, well, this is the best place to play because it's the most powerful system. But now we're seeing the PS5 outperform it. So it is an odd place for Microsoft to be right now, but I do think this is something that we won't notice as much in like a year or two as developers get more used to it, and most likely we'll probably see third-party games end up performing better on the Xbox Series X before the end of this generation. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.